Well, welcome everyone to our Aging and Spirituality podcast. As you know, what we do here is we try to open the door to help you find your unrealized potential. And we have a special guest with us tonight, but first we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Chris Jensen,
Hello, I'm Kathy Lee Taylor.
and this is Dr. Gala Gorman, and she has done phenomenal work with helping women to deal with chronic stress. So I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll let her tell you a little more about herself. She's a licensed acupuncturist, naturopath, and she's written several books, including very recently, What is Your Kryptonite? Love that title. And she helps women manage stress and the kind of stress that really becomes toxic and is threatening to what she calls their superwoman status. So in her mid-30s, she sold her business to eliminate stress and adopted a very restrictive, as many of us have tried, uh, lifestyle and diet, and thought she was on the right track. But 25 years later now, doing this wonderful work, she knows she didn't need to make such extreme changes to restore her well-being. And I think that's what's going to be so interesting to everyone who's on today. She only needed to change a few things, and the things that she said were essentially what she calls kryptonite in her world. So she'll be talking to us a little bit about that. And she shares those insights to help women maintain what she calls their superwoman status by finding and managing what's draining them of their energy and power without having to completely make their life into upheaval. And she advocates for getting to the root cause of the health issue and treating it naturally, which is what we talk about here a lot, using a collaborative approach. And she says her patients become their own primary care person. And she emphasizes small changes can create big results. So anything more about your background that you'd like to share before we start asking you questions?
Holy moly, Chris, that was a great introduction, and you pretty much like covered it all.
Oh,
So,
right.
yeah, we're like ready to dig in, stir
Great.
the pot there.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So most people are aware that they've got a lot of stress in their lives and it's not good. But what would you say is kind of the tipping point where stress becomes chronic and toxic? And what are the signs of stress becoming toxic?
So, the key sign is you've got some symptom popping up. And so that symptom literally could be anything. Your body is gonna produce a symptom, some symptom that you can see outwardly or like experience in a way that it's barking at you loudly enough that you've got to do something about it. So that symptom isn't the first that your body has had to deal with this. Your body basically has been dealing with it, dealing with it, dealing with it, dealing with it until it got to the point where it couldn't handle it any longer. And now some symptom has popped up. And from our perspective, we've been conditioned to believe that that symptom was like the first sign of it. But that's not the first sign of it. It's just, your body finally said, I can't maintain all of this any longer. So I'm just going to let this thing pop up while I focus on some of this other stuff I've got going on.
Wow, that's an interesting way to look at it, right, Chris? I mean, because we say like energetically something that is making you have a dis-ease
Mhm.
has been there for a long time. By the time you get to a physical symptom, it's coming down from a causal level through the spiritual levels. And once you are at the energetic level where it's causing you migraines or depression or whatever it is that the disease is showing up with, you're far into the process. And that's like a last warning sign.
Yeah.
So, so for our listeners, if you're already at a symptom stage, just know that you can't afford to look away at that point. This is like a real warning sign. So, okay, so we're talking about kryptonite, and let's see. It triggers chronic toxic stress, and we want to know what are some of the um, tips for identifying these stressors in your life. So if you're feeling like you have a migraine, is that a symptom of disease? Is that a warning sign? Like how does somebody process that?
So, a migraine is a pretty extreme symptom. You know,
Mm.
some of us get headaches that sort of come and go.
Yeah.
I might get a headache once every few months, and it's a clear sign that I've got a toxic buildup. And if I take a few moments, I can think through like what I've eaten in the last couple of days or something that I've done, exposed myself to that has created too much toxicity for my body to handle it. And a headache will emerge, and that has to, you know, I have to basically focus on detoxing whatever that was to relieve the headache. And that's as opposed to how we're typically conditioned to deal with it. And that is by suppressing the symptom with some sort of pain reliever, right? When we suppress the symptom, then, you know, the way you described it, basically, you know, you're just pushing that further into the body and creating more things to deal with. But I have a tool that is a resource in my MOLT method program.
That's what I was going to ask you. That is the MOLT method then. That's when you're
Yes.
talking about the MOLT, that's identifying where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So in the last chapter of the book, I talk about the MOLT method, and MOLT is an acronym. And the way I describe it is we all need to molt or shed stress, just like any creature in nature sheds its trappings, right? When it's outgrown them. And M is for mindset, O is for order, L is for lifestyle, and T is for toxins. And so toxins are arguably the hardest to shed, the hardest stress to get at, because it's, I mean, just like countless sources of toxicity, literally limitless
Seems like it.
sources of toxicity. And depending on what you've got going on individually, uniquely yours, your like combination of factors, including, you know, like you guys mentioned, these emotional upheavals you may have had to deal with, but also your genetic components, then coupled with, you know, whatever toxic thing that you've got going on in your environment. I evaluate 12 categories of toxicity, but the reason why one person will have dis-ease escalate to disease and another person doesn't, maybe even in the same household, is because of this unique combination of factors that, you know, everybody is just different. And it's frustrating because a lot of times the root cause is missed because people dismiss it. They say, well, it couldn't be that because everybody else in the same environment, in the same situation, didn't get sick. You know, if you remember the movie Aaron Brockovich, right? Where the water was toxic. And, you know, a disproportionate number of people got really sick to the point of cancer, dying, that sort of thing. But not everybody got sick, right? And so that's the reason why it goes on for so long without being, you know, figured out. Literally, if, you know, everybody who walked through this restaurant came out the other side with food poisoning, like, you know, that restaurant, it wouldn't be very long before that was figured out, right? But even the people who ate at that restaurant, only 20% of them got really sick because the other 80% of them had, you know, what we kind of think of as like an iron gut, where literally like they could eat anything and it's not going to make them sick. And then you've got, you know, some people got just a little sick, just a little nauseous, and they didn't put two and two together. And then some people literally spent all night in the bathroom, you know, and so there's just
Some tips that help
countless examples of that, you know.
Yeah, some tips that help people identify like what is the big trigger in their life, you know, because I can see someone thinking, well, okay, everybody else in the house isn't having this problem, but I am. So how can they, how can they, as you say, find their kryptonite? Like what's setting them off?
Well, it starts by developing awareness. And so you ladies talk about spirituality. I'm sure you talk a lot about developing awareness. And
Mindset.
yeah. And so so if you are tuned in to that sort of goal, intention, when you have a symptom pop up, if you will take that symptom and you will unravel it, typically if you unravel it for a few days going back. So I use dairy as an example. Almost everybody needs to get off the dairy. We as Americans, because of the way our dairy is processed in the United States and because of our genetic soup that most of us are dealing with, we just uniquely have a problem with dairy. But the interesting thing with dairy is that people miss it for a really long time because it takes 3 days for dairy to overwhelm your immune system. So you can eat dairy one day, and if you normally don't eat dairy and you just have a little dairy one day, it'll spike your immune system. You might not feel great, but you won't be full on sick. You won't start seeing skin problems and stuff like that. But if you eat dairy for a few 3 or 4 days and that accumulates in your system, now you'll start seeing all the signs, but you won't put 2 and 2 together because you've been eating dairy for days and you think, well, if it was dairy, I would have seen that on the first day, you know? And so that's why some of these things are so challenging to unravel. I use a bioenergetic system to help me kind of talk to the body and get some two-way communication going. What we do is we introduce just energetic signatures of some of these things, and then the body like sends back either nope, that's not the problem, or yeah, that's where we're getting resistance. So that's what helps me kind of machete through it. If you don't have the benefit of doing that, then you really have to the easiest thing really is to eliminate some things. What I typically recommend for people who are trying to DIY it at home is to eliminate what I call the big 5. And that is dairy, wheat, yeast, sugar, and alcohol. And that's a lot. And that's why, you know, when you introduced me, you said that I had really eliminated a lot of things. And I found that I really didn't need to eliminate all those things. And so I find that with people that I work with members, like they don't really need to eliminate all those things. But if they're trying to DIY it themselves, it's because of what I just described with you with the dairy, like it doesn't, it's not like you've got a peanut allergy and you have just a fragment of a peanut and you blow up like the blueberry girl in Willy Wonka, right? You know, it's more subtle than that. And you know, it's just you do that and you lean into intermittent fasting, give your body more of a digest period for digestive rest. And so then when you reintroduce something, because your body has had some time to rest and initiate the healing response, then when you reintroduce something, you're more likely to see the reaction, which is actually what you want to happen, because the reaction was happening, but it's getting buried in the noise of everything else that you're reacting to.
So if somebody, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I do. Well, yeah, I will go because I want to ask her about this biogenetic system while we're talking at the physical level. You know, we're talking about the body responding, which, you know, we also want to talk about where the triggers start with the mind and emotions and those kinds of things. But while we're talking about the body, I want to know a little bit more about what's a biogenetic system.
Bioenergetics.
Oh, bioenergetics.
So, yeah. So, I was introduced to this technology essentially. Oh, I don't know, probably 15 years ago now. And it's evolved. I use a proprietary process and combine a bunch of things at this point.
Okay.
But over time, and actually it started hundreds of years ago,
Okay.
the Oriental medicine practitioners figured out a way to tap into the energy system of the body and kind of like get the biofeedback essentially. And so we've just evolved that. And if you understand how MRI technology works, for example, like MRI technology uses magnets to essentially reassemble your energetic system in your body so that it can produce these images, right? And so we know we have the technology, right? We uh, uh, medical doctors will use frequency to explode kidney stones so that you don't have to excrete them, you know, in their full size, you know, if they disintegrate, and then you can excrete them easily. And so there's all, you know, sorts of ways that this is being used in advanced medicine, like medical field medicine. But from an alternative medicine perspective, it's been used for hundreds of years. It's just evolved. And so essentially we um, introduce signals to the body that are resonating frequencies. And if that resonating frequency resonates, then it is like, you're fine, that one's fine. And if it doesn't resonate and you hit resistance, then it's like, oh, we need to adjust something there.
Well, those feedback systems for the body, I think, are really important for people. And it sounds like this is something that's proprietary for your work, which is great. But if there's anything that our listeners can take advantage of, let's have a link and put it in the bio of our notes, and that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I don't think I know of anything that's really just not a practitioner,
okay,
an
extension of a practitioner. So
okay.
So now what about somebody who's been living with chronic stress for a couple of years, and maybe it's not food or diet related? I mean, what do you do then? And can you reverse this? You know, if they've been living with this long, it's taking a toll on them.
So my husband is a psychotherapist and specializes in dealing with trauma. And so we have a lot of we've done a lot of work in, you know, learning what is possible with trauma therapy. And so if you have been experiencing emotional stress for an extended period of time, emotional mental stress, it is what would be referred to as complex PTSD. When you, especially if you're still experiencing it. So if you're in a toxic relationship of some sort, if you are working in an environment that's just constantly putting extreme stress on you, if you are dealing with a loved one who has a critical illness, if you're a caregiver, when you sort of shouldn't have to be anymore, you should be cared for yourself at this point, and you're caregiving for someone, that is creating trauma, and that trauma and the stress of it is building up in your body and creating PTSD. And it's a little more challenging to unravel that, because oftentimes the person is still being traumatized. You know, the problem with complex PTSD is that it's not a one-time event, right? It's like you're getting drip fed trauma, right? And the good news though is that you can unravel that. you deal with that trauma, just like you deal with any other trauma. And the one thing I will say though, is that if what is causing the trauma cannot be just managed better. Sometimes we just need to be better at setting boundaries, and we need to know our limits, and we need to, accept that we are trying to be Superwoman for everybody else but ourselves, kind of thing. So boundaries are certainly a thing. And if you can set better boundaries, then you may be able to just adjust in your same environment, same relationships, same work, same what you've got going on. And then still you're going to need to deal with the trauma, right? You're going to need to heal that trauma. You're going to need to reprocess that. So the way I like to describe how trauma works is that every time we have an experience, our mind opens up a file. And this is the business person, accountant in me, right? I'm envisioning this file that gets opened up for this client related to this project, right? And so anytime we have something going on, we open up this file and we start throwing things in this file that are related to whatever this experience is, right? But when it's traumatic, when we've experienced these emotions, these over the top emotions related to this experience, for a number of reasons, our mind kind of keeps the file open. So now it's created what some people refer to as an open loop. Essentially, your everything that you experience, then your mind is rifling through that folder to make sure that you're being careful enough not to put yourself at risk again, right? And so when we do trauma therapy, when we work through that and reprocess it, essentially what we do is we go back and we say, okay, that happened, nothing I can do about it, but let's essentially understand the experience a little bit better, close the file, and stick it in memory with all the other memories that were not traumatic, right? And if you've ever talked to anybody who's done this trauma release work, that's what it feels like. It's before the trauma release work, everything just felt current, visceral, like it was happening right now. And after the trauma release work, it's I can remember it, but I've got it in perspective now,
Right. That's such an interesting answer, and it really segues into the question that's been going on in my mind as you were talking, and it has to do with so many people now that are not PTSD, that are not, in that trauma cycle, are experiencing incredibly high levels of stress because of everything that's coming at them. The way the world is right now, so many more people that are off center, experiencing extremes of emotions. So many people just not managing their stress and not understanding how to stay present and in the moment because there's so much going on in the world. So the fear aspect of it is really difficult for them to handle, and they not necessarily aware of it, or they don't know how to handle it because it's coming at them in ways they've never experienced before. So we're kind of unprecedented times, I think, that way. And you kind of answered the question I wanted to ask, which is, when those people are in the moment and they have a lot of stuff they're at work and somebody's angry at them, or they've got a friend who's flipped her lid and turned into a not friend, or whatever it is, they need the tools to, like you said, not leave the records in, you know, the woo-woo people will call that your Akashic records. You have records going, you know, back lifetimes,
Yeah.
right? That are memories there that you can access if you want, but you don't want those always open. You don't want to be like sifting through your awareness, sifting through and access to that. So if I think I think part of the answer I'm trying to get to is how can they stay in the moment and keep it healthy for themselves? You know, yes, keeping boundaries is one thing for sure, but you know, what would you tell them about just being present in a way that they don't get knocked off center?
So, it's the one thing I will say is that I don't want to minimize this.
Right.
Or, you know, everybody's got their own experience, and their current experience is layering on the
Right.
top of other experiences and
Sure.
probably some of these files that are open, right?
Right.
So I don't want to minimize that and say, oh, you just need to like learn to keep things in perspective. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, yes, you do, but sometimes these current things that other people seem to be able to just manage and say, like, I got no control over that. Like, really, the answer is choose your battles. Some
Right.
things you have some control over, and many, many, many things we don't.
Right.
And wherever possible, you've got to just put your blinders on to things that you have no control over that really upset you. And
Really like
and yeah,
being able to hold the uncomfortableness and be okay with that. It's okay. You know,
yeah.
I got this going on. That's okay. And at the same time, being able to step back into who you are and how you want to express and, you know, your chosen whatever modality for the day. So it's tough for a lot of people, but I think that is part of the answer. Yeah, Chris is biting at the bit over
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, one of the things that's really, I think is important here is that what we're talking about is your reaction to stress, to a
Mhm.
stressful event. And that's part of why some people go bonkers and some don't. And I had a psychologist once tell me that the definition of being well adjusted is having a stressful event come up, having, you know, an emotional reaction to it, but very quickly shifting into, okay, this is happening. Now, what am I going to do about it? And you know, we do yoga. We've taught yoga for years, and one of the things that we teach people about yoga is it helps us to stay centered and peaceful despite the events that are coming on around us. And you know that is that something is that part of what you're working with here in terms of
Yeah, and you know what it brought up for me was a reminder when I was doing my doctorate studies. I did my doctorate studies on bioenergetics. I've always been into technology, and so like using technology was like right up my alley.
Yeah.
And so one of the research studies that I found um came up with the correlation that people who had a traumatic event, a super stressful traumatic event, think traumatic divorce, you know, major loss of income, death of a loved one, you know, some really what people would consider a major traumatic experience. Those people who were able to kind of process it and work through it and move on were fine. But the ones that got stuck, a very high, disproportionately high number of those people developed cancer.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's what's at stake.
Mm. Mhm.
That, you know, if you feel like you're stuck,
Mm.
and you just can't figure out how to let it go, certainly what you ladies are talking about with yoga, you know, you will get no argument from me there. Yoga like ticks all the boxes. That's what I regularly say. You know, it's exercise and meditation and mindfulness and relaxation and right.
Yeah.
But but if you are experiencing something and you just are having trouble working through it, then I urge you not to think you can stuff it down and
Yeah,
just
Yes.
put a smile on your face and keep
that's not-
going, because you're not going to get away with it.
Stuffing it down makes
Most likely.
it worse.
Yeah.
Well, that was your personal experience, right? You had people in your family that had cancer, and it very much was a motivator for you to do the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
So you read this into it.
my mom got breast cancer, golly, in the late 90s. And she I have a family history of breast cancer. My grandmother had breast cancer. My grandmother's sister had breast cancer. My mother had breast cancer, and my sister had breast cancer. And if you've read anything in my book, then you know that, I lost my sister to cancer a couple of years ago, and that's what finally had me stop procrastinating about getting this book out there, because this stuff needed to be said. But my mom had a very traumatic relationship with my father, and they had what we know in this world to be a trauma bond, essentially.
Right.
And when they finally broke up for the last time, she just had such strong emotional feelings and was just so stuck
Right.
in that she developed cancer not long after that, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's a very long, sad story. And we don't need to go down that rabbit hole very far to know that, to know what that looks like
Right.
when either you or somebody you love has had a really troubling experience,
Right.
and there's an amount of time that grieving is absolutely necessary
Yes.
and appropriate.
Yep.
And then there's like where you just kind of get addicted to grieving and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like somehow you don't feel like it's appropriate to let it go. Like
Yeah.
somehow in your mind, on some level, you've determined that this is the place you belong,
Well, this
which
is where you
it's
need
not.
support systems. So this is,
Yeah.
you're a support system. I'm a life
Yeah.
coach. That's the support system. This is when
Yeah.
you need people telling you, oh no, you have to work through this grief. You have to learn to let go. You have to learn to surrender. Chris and I talk about surrender all the time when it comes to yoga. And that's part of the healing process. Don't let yourself get stuck there, listeners. That's the thing. That's what we're trying to say. Make sure that you take care of yourself. This is where self-care comes in. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine who's a holistic practitioner, he told me that the failure of a lot of holistic programs is that people don't see the results immediately and they don't stick with it long enough. So is this a problem that you've seen with people who start your program? And if it is, what do you do to deal with it, to help them get what they want?
So what's really interesting is that when I start working with somebody, I tend to have pretty quick, within maybe the first month, we see some pretty good results in the first month.
Awesome. That's awesome.
And I know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's sort of like your body finally taking a breath of fresh air and going, finally, you're giving me a little extra resources to work with. Now I can finally get to work on all this other stuff that I've like built up over time, right? And so the person on the protocol thinks their work is done. And I know their work is just getting started, right? It's going to take 6 to 12 months and repeated protocols to continue like pulling things out layer by layer until we get to the point where your body has enough resilience, enough freed up resources that the things that just naturally it's forced to deal with, it says, no brainer, I got this. But if you just barely start and get a little bit of relief and you stop, then what happens is all that happens is that a little bit of toxicity adds back onto the top and you're kind of right back where you started. And then they think, oh, it didn't work. It's like, no, you just didn't stay with it. You know, you've got to stick with it. And it is, that is so medication, prescription medication, which I do not prescribe medication of any sort. So, so I am, biased against medication, if you want to, put it that way.
Yeah.
But, basically medication is super powerful. It works really in a really powerfully strong way. And it essentially turns off or on some signaling that they have in all their research figured out that it's this signal that is creating the problem, the symptom, whatever. And so what they don't explain is that when you orally take a medication and it has to go all the way through your digestive system to get to that one thing it's supposedly turning on or off, it communicated with a heck of a lot of stuff on its way there. And then when you turn on or off that one signal it's trying to get at, there's a domino effect of additional downstream things that now are being communicated with differently, which is the reason why we have so many side effects.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you're going to take a medication to deal with the side effects, then you basically just introduced a whole new quagmire. And so it's no surprise that when we've suppressed symptoms, whether we've suppressed them with medication or we've suppressed them with supplements or, you know, however we've done that, it's no surprise that now you've got this really odd mishmash of things going on that it just isn't going to get unraveled in a week or two. You know, it's going to take a little while to get through that maze.
Well, that's fascinating. Makes me want to ask about my AFib, but I'm not going to make it about me. So here's the thing. Like talking about being a superwoman, really, you know, that interests me because I'm this weird person that was in the Superwoman movie, you know, like playing like I was still a little kid, you know.
It's funny because I've talked to several women in my interviews that have said, you know, that they used to play Superwoman as a kid. So
all the time. But the cute part was I was with my daughter-in-law and we were both doing the same thing. We're like anyway, we wanted the thing about being a superwoman, because I've had to do a lot of work in my own yogic life from being, you know, from going from, oh, I'm just all full of willpower and I'm going to put my head down and bash my way through. And that was my idea of superwoman, you know, and that cost me. That did physically, emotionally, mentally. So I want to hear what you think a superwoman is and, you know, what things I might be doing that are causing me stress thinking that I'm a superwoman.
That's a really good question, actually. The way I think of Superwoman is the woman that, you know, honestly, my sister was Superwoman in her world. She was a single mom of 2 kids. She ran her own business. She was an accountant as well, and ran her own CPA firm out of her home because her daughter, her oldest, got mono when she was in 2nd grade. She always had like a lot of allergies and was just a really sensitive kid. But she got mono when she was in 2nd grade and my sister had to homeschool her. And with the exception of 1 year, she was homeschooled all the way through her school years. And then my sister moved her family to Texas. They lived out in the middle of the country, and she had this little farmette because she always wanted horses. And so she rescued these massive, like Percheron and Clydesdale horses. And, she was always sharing some crazy story from the farmette with me. And I was just like, that's your life, not mine. But holy moly, like she was totally Superwoman. Like, I'll never forget the time she told me that in the last few days we would get on the phone and just talk for hours. We didn't get to see each other that much because we didn't live close, but we would talk on the phone for hours. And she told me one time that she was out in the hay barn and there was a copperhead snake, and she went and got her gun and shot the snake. And
Yeah, okay.
I'm like, okay, like way too much information, right? Like I'm traumatized just hearing the story, right? So, Superwoman is that woman who's already literally like way beyond burning a candle at both ends.
Yes.
And then some new thing comes along. The son or daughter decides they want to do some new hobby, and you don't want to tell them no because you work too much and you should spend more time with your kids. So you tell them you'll figure it out, even though you don't have time to run around and add that to your plate. Or some new client comes along and you're already too busy, but you don't want to turn the new client away because one, you're flattered that they want to work with you, and two, maybe you could use the few extra bucks. Or in my sister's case, she was kicking the can down the road on symptoms she was seeing. And by the time she finally was forced to deal with it, it was really severe. And then she tried to just keep juggling everything she was trying to juggle and take care of herself, which just didn't work. And so our new and improved version of Superwoman is the woman who is perfectly willing to tell those stakeholders in her world, know what? No, or, let me think about that. And let me put a little thought into that and figure out where that can work itself in after I take care of myself first. Because that self-care time, whether that's your yoga class or whether that's making sure that you're eating healthy or getting outside for your morning walk or taking that 15 minutes for meditation, or you're reading a book that's really, lifting your spirits, like whatever that is, your time, after you make sure that happens. Now it's like, let me look at everything I've got going on and get real and say, okay, now if I add this one more thing, something's got to go.
Yep.
I can't just keep piling it on.
That's the best answer ever, because the idea of self-care is to put your oxygen mask on first, that old analogy of being on a and for a lot of women it's counterintuitive, but you have to. Listeners have to. That's the most important thing we've probably talked about in this call. Put your mask on first. Take care of yourself first. That's what being a superwoman is all about.
And we want to send a really strong message to our kids. And my sister's son was the younger of her two kids, and he always just felt like his mom worked too much, and like he wanted no part of that kind of life. And I think that if you're wanting to set an example,
right,
even though you might get some pushback initially, because when stakeholders in our world, when we've been giving them everything they ask for and then we start saying no, they're going to push back initially.
Oh well.
Yeah, but if you will demonstrate what it looks like to make self-care a high priority and to honor yourself and do it in a way that that doesn't feel just like angry and mean,
Yeah.
that
Right.
is like loving and,
Yeah.
I love you. And in order to be able to keep loving you, I need to take care of myself,
Myself first.
right? Like,
Yes.
Right.
my sister is not around anymore for her kids. And
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
daughter
Mhm.
has two little ones
Mhm.
that she was not still alive when the second one was born, but she was fairly close to the older of the two little ones, and they won't get to grow up with their grandma.
Oh, that's too
And
bad.
that's super sad,
That's
right?
yeah.
So, ladies, let's take care of ourselves
Yeah.
and let's show them how it's done.
You got it.
Because you're not doing anybody any favors by
Yeah.
pretending like you've got this when basically you're disintegrating from the inside out.
Yeah, that's such a critical point. I think that's a really high important thought for people because women don't get that. And they are setting an example.
Yeah.
And you want to set the example that, if I take care of myself, I can be strong for you.
Exactly. I can't think of a more important question than that one right there. So that's a great note
Right.
to go with.
I think so. This has been awesome. I think you're motivating our listeners to do something. I
I
really,
hope so. I hope so. I want people to take it seriously. And, I don't want to be doom and gloom. That's not going to help. Everybody just will tune that out. I
Yeah.
want it to feel like, you've got some positive ideas for things that you actually can do
Yeah.
without just turning the world upside down. You do not have to turn the world upside down to take a half an hour out for yourself.
Got that.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Right.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We will put information about you and your program in our show notes. So if our listeners want to get in touch with you, they can do that because I think, we're all interested. So
Yeah. What is your book called?
What's your kryptonite? Manage the
Oh, right.
toxic
Right.
stressors
Right.
threatening your superwoman status.
You
Yeah,
said
yeah.
that up front. So we'll put a link in there for that too. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Right.
Great conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so
Thanks so much for
much.
having me. Yeah.
Okay.
Take care.
See you, listeners.
Bye-bye.